We take stone and turn it into a masterpiece. We take snow and make a new friend. In Canada, we take our milk and proudly change it into full moons, clouds, totem poles, and even bars of gold. Look for this symbol on your dairy products. 100% Canadian milk, a source of pride.
I auditioned for the role of that kid with the ice cream there. They said I looked too old and grumpy. You know what? It's an ad for milk. I didn't know you had to advertise milk, but they're actually not advertising milk. They're advertising Canadian milk because apparently people prefer American milk, not because it tastes any better, but because it is massively cheaper. In fact, the other day, I am not making this up, I read a news story about a cheese smuggling operation across the border at Niagara Falls. They were smuggling trucks of cheese from New York into Ontario and selling them out of the back of the truck to pizzerias. Why? Why would you smuggle cheese and not drugs? Well, because there was an enormous markup, because we have a cartel in Canada, and it is a crazy thing. Joining us now to talk about this craziness at the dairy aisle is our friend, Professor Ian Lee, who's a professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, who grew up on a dairy farm, so he knows his milk. Welcome to the show. Professor, we are talking about this because Canada's dairy cartel's days may be numbered. Tell me about what this prospective free trade deal with the European Union might mean for Canadians who eat cheese and drink milk.
Well, first off, it is a cartel. It's a legal cartel in Canada, set up by the Pierre Trudeau government in the 70s with the full cooperation of the provinces, and they control foreign competition coming into Canada very dramatically so that they can fix the price at a price much higher than you would otherwise pay. This has been a huge barrier and a real irritant with both the Europeans on the one hand, with whom we have been negotiating a trade agreement, and on the other hand with Australia and New Zealand, who gave up their own supply management cartel back in the 90s and 2000, respectively, for the two countries. So these countries have said, wait a minute, we want access to your country. And of course, the government was trying to protect supply management. Every political party has protected it since 1971. And so this was the sticking point. And so what happened, and I'll be very quick on this, I think to close the deal, it became very clear that Prime Minister Harper had to back down and he didn't actually end supply management, but he's allowing in a lot more cheese from Europe than was allowed under the existing supply management rules. This is to our good. This is to our benefit. We're going to have more choices.
Well, I mean, Professor, we know of the most famous cartel in the world, OPEC.
Exactly.
And the whole point of OPEC was to get more money from people buying oil and giving it to the people selling oil. Iran, Saudi Arabia, much of the Middle East. Now we know that that's terrible for people who fill up their car with gas. Why on earth would our own government, you say it was under Pierre Trudeau, but it has been the law through Mulroney, through Chrétien, and through Harper, who's been PM for 7 years now. So we can't all slough it off on Trudeau. And you mentioned the provinces are in on this too. Why would we have a cartel against our own consumers? And it's worse than that. Professor, if you're a wealthy doctor making $200,000 a year and you have to spend an extra $1 a liter on milk, no big deal. But if you are a low-income person and you're spending twice as much for milk and cheese, it actually makes a real difference in your standard of living. It's a regressive form of taxation. Why are we doing that to our own people, Professor?
You are absolutely correct. This is why this policy, this supply management is so, I call it evil. I mean, it is hurting the people at the bottom who spend the most on food because they have very limited incomes. And it really does, notwithstanding what the Dairy Farmers Association says. It is much cheaper in the United States for the same product when you compare a pound of turkey or a pound of butter. It is literally a third to 50% cheaper there. But to answer your question, what happened was the farmers were much more powerful back in the 60s because there were a lot more of them. At the time when they set up supply management, there were over 200,000 farmers in Canada, dairy farmers. Today, by the way, there's just under 13,000. Many have left and sold out to other farmers who bought their quotas and so forth. But to answer your question expressly, they were in rural ridings and they were quite concentrated and there were a lot of them. And so they lobbied their MPs, and the Liberal government was in that expansionary phase, when he first came to power, and he was looking for ways, I think it was fair to say that Prime Minister Trudeau was looking for ways to build up and expand the state. And this became, and then he had some people in his cabinet who were very forceful advocates of this. And so he had a majority government, and it just sailed right through Parliament. And the moment, of course, it was set up for one product line, the others said, my goodness, this is the gravy train. Yeah. We have just achieved nirvana.
So we got it for milk, we got it for cheese, we got it for chicken, we got it for turkey. Are there any? Now I know we don't.
Products.
We don't have. Yeah, dairy, but we don't have it for beef.
That's right.
And that's why our beef in Canada is so much more affordable.
Absolutely.
The idea that beef is cheaper or the same price as chicken is absurd in the United States,
exactly.
But in Canada is because we don't have these beef cartels. Thank God.
Exactly. And to be really clear for your listeners, I'm not criticizing all farmers or all agriculture. It's only these 5 protected sectors. And by the way, we're talking less than 18,000 farmers in the entire country in all of these 5 protected sectors. Yeah. We're not talking millions of farmers or hundreds of thousands. The Dairy Council or Dairy Alliance will go on and on about protecting the family farm. They're down to 12,000, I think it's 12,500 dairy farmers. It's nonsense.
Yeah. Just buy them out. I understand someone who just paid $100,000 for a bunch of dairy quotas.
Yes.
A quota is like a carbon credit. It gives you the right to milk your own. Yeah, a license to milk your own cow. So someone who just bought that quota from another farmer doesn't want his license to be suddenly worth nothing. I get it. Well, I don't care. Buy them out. Give them a settlement and stop another generation of having to pay. And by the way, it'll keep more Canadians shopping in Canada. If you live in Edmonton or, far away from the border, you're stuck buying Canadian food. But if you live in Vancouver or White Rock or Montreal or even Toronto.
How about Ottawa?
Yeah, exactly. If you live near the border, you go down to the weekend, you fill up your tank with gas, you fill up with milk and cheese and turkey. You're probably spending $200 in groceries on the U.S. side because of the cartel.
Precisely, and I will fully declare on your program, I do it. I drive to Ogdensburg, New York, which is 55 minutes from Ottawa on the U.S. side, right opposite Prescott, Ontario. And the reason why is the price differential is so that I'll give you a quick example. Last Saturday, Thanksgiving weekend, a turkey, 25-pound turkey that in Ottawa was over $80. Went down to Ogdensburg to the Price Chopper, a chain of American grocery stores similar to Loblaws. That same 25-pound turkey was on for $34, but they were handing out $10 off coupons to everybody. We got the turkey for $24. That's $1 a pound.
You're making me hungry. You are making me hungry. But I get your point. It's a beautiful drive. I have driven down to Ogdensburg from Ottawa. It's a very pleasant drive. I can imagine in the fall the colors are gorgeous.
They were.
It's a nice drive, and
true.
You get there, and you know what? You buy a few things. You just saved yourself $100.
Exactly.
You buy a few things, and why not? And in a way, you're taking business away from shopkeepers in Canada because you're pricing them. And if it's 12 or 15,000 farmers, buy out their quotas and bring.
Yes.
Last question.
Yes.
You mentioned that Australia, New Zealand used to do this, but they don't do it now. Have you studied what happened in those jurisdictions after they got rid of this cartel?
They did something very similar to what you just suggested. They said, look, we can't just expropriate these quotas that people have paid good money for, so they imposed a tax in Australia for 10 years, a special tax that went directly to the farmers to pay them back for their quota. And it wasn't the people who had the quotas the longest in time received the smallest amount of repayment on the basis the logic was that they'd already made a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So it was the newer ones, the most recent ones that got paid back the most.
Well, I'm glad they managed to get out of it. Hopefully we will too. It is great to talk turkey with you, my friend. Look forward to seeing you again too.